JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is difficult to describe. It's really hard to put into words why I and so many others consider it a masterpiece. On the surface, it really doesn't seem that good. Throughout a lot of the series, there's a lot of plot inconsistencies, Araki forgot, and overall a lot of things that when compared to other anime or manga make it seem really not that great. But despite all that, I still consider JoJo's to be my favorite work of fiction. While I am going to reference some specific plot points or battles in this video, I will avoid spoilers for the most part, so that if one wanted, they could watch this video before experiencing the masterpiece that is JoJo. JoJo is divided into currently 8 parts. Each part is entirely different from the others, and they are pretty much self-contained stories in their own right. Being divided in this way does amazing to keep it fresh. The story rarely ever feels stale or like you've been seeing too much of the same thing. Now, keep in mind, I say rarely feels stale because the middle of part 3 exists. The part structure also allows for great variety in the type of stories that Hirohiko Araki, the author of JoJo, can tell. Part 1 is your standard hero's journey, call to action, defeat the villain, that shit type of story. Part 4 is almost like a slice of life story. Part 6 is a Shawshank Redemption ripoff, but with more snails. And not even Araki knows what Part 8 is about. Along with these very different plots for each part, there's also a completely different cast of characters. Speaking of characters... To quote Araki's book, Manga in Theory and Practice, of the 4 fundamentals, those being themes, character, story, and setting, characters are supreme. If you have effective characters in place, you will be undefeatable. Taken to the extreme, this means that compelling characters negate the need for story or setting. That's how incredibly important they are. This is absolutely true for any story, and you can see how this mindset affects how JoJo's is written. Before creating any characters, however, Araki always fills out a character history sheet. Here is the character sheet that Araki uses to make characters now, taken from his book. Haha, how convenient. Okay, now obviously a lot of the stuff on here won't always be relevant, like a religion or economic status for... I don't know, economic status is kind of important. Araki uses everything he writes down for a character to truly understand how these characters should be portrayed. And this attention to detail is not wasted. Almost every single one of the characters that Araki writes feels like they could be a real person. This is very impressive. It's especially impressive when you consider how relatable and frankly amazing all the villains are. Speaking of villains... Each main part in the series contains a major antagonist, someone who is the driving force for the plot. Except for Part 8, who the fuck even knows what's going on in Part 8? As a rule, villains are usually more interesting than good guys, because they are not at all afraid to assert themselves. JoJo main antagonists always express a darker side of humanity that resides within all of us, like a lust for power, or a desire to just live a quiet life. And these traits make them instantly relatable as a person to most people, at least to some extent. Araki states that, when an evil character freely exhibits those normally hidden desires and acts in a way that the readers could not, the readers can find great catharsis. In the first story arc of JoJo, I always intended to make Dio look cool as he charged headlong down the villain's path, but I think it's due to that catharsis that some readers took to the character with incredible zeal. This bold approach to writing characters that almost completely ignores the need for motivation in favor of relatability is amazing. Araki understands the typical rules for writing perfectly well, but chooses to bend them to suit the story. Minor antagonists mostly don't need to follow the rule of being relatable. They're a completely different aspect of the story than major antagonists. They usually serve little more purpose than being a roadblock for the protagonists. Minor villains show up, get defeated, and that's the last we see of them as villains, with some exceptions. As opposed to other popular series, minor antagonists usually aren't stronger than the ones that appeared before them. The stakes don't forever continue to rise. Each minor villain is just another part of the journey, with different abilities and a unique and cool fight. Now that all that stupid nerd shit is out of the way, let's get on to the real reason that JoJo's is so loved. It's really fucking cool. Every major character after Part 2 has a completely unique power called a stand, and these powers can be just about anything. Fire powers, the ability to punch things really hard, literally just a magic gun. Then there are weirder ones, like the ability to steal anything, including abstract concepts like friction using bubbles. It can be weird as hell, but how the stands are used is always awesome. When the villain thinks that they're about to win, and then the JoJo of the part comes back, and then his badass theme music starts playing, and then the JoJo reveals that they've actually outsmarted the villain. It's so cool! But even before stands were being used, shit was still rad. In Part 2, we saw the main JoJo use a variety of weird tricks to outsmart his opponent, keeping everyone on their toes. Shit's tight as fuck! If there's one thing that I want anybody to take away from all this, it's that JoJo is cool as hell. I mean, of course it's also an amazingly written story, but above all else, it's just really cool.